we're going to do one of my favorite things. We're going to have a little bit of a history lesson because I think far too often we don't understand the context of things. It's like biblical interpretation. To understand what's going on in the world today, we have to know the context, historically speaking.
Yes.
So Louisiana wants to put the Ten Commandments back into classrooms. And this could be a trend that sweeps across the country. Now, to get there, we have to understand the Supreme Court and its history and the Constitution with the idea of why aren't they in the classroom now? And should they be? So the very first place to start, obviously, is the Constitution. Hello. So the framers solved this for us, right? Because in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, they wrote this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the first thing they put in there, followed by freedom of speech, press, assembly, and to have to redress your grievances, which is everyone's favorite thing to do with grievances, is redress them, of course. So did they clear this up? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Pretty clear?
No.
What do you mean? Framers, founders. It's clear.
That says nothing about putting the Ten Commandments on a school wall.
Yeah, this is the whole reason we have to have a Supreme Court.
Right.
To interpret laws and determine whether they are constitutional. And this one has been a thing for a long time. In fact, coming up in just a few moments, what we'll do is look at a case, Stone v. Graham. You probably never heard of it. Stone v. Graham, which was heard on November 17th, 1980, or was when that was the ruling was brought down, was responding to Kentucky requiring 10 Commandments be placed in schools.
Okay, yep.
How did they rule in this? And where are we now? One of the news stories we haven't hit yet that we're talking about today, we'll get to it specifically in a few moments. The state of Louisiana wants to require the 10 Commandments be posted in every public school classroom, including state-funded colleges. But before we can talk about that, we have to look at the history of 10 Commandments in classrooms, okay? So the history technically goes all the way back to the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Since that was penned, the court has tried to figure out what that actually means.
Right.
So if you fast forward dramatically in time to November 17th, 1980, the Supreme Court in Stone v. Graham made a specific decision about 10 Commandments posted in classrooms. The state of Kentucky had a statute then requiring school officials to post a copy of the 10 Commandments, purchased with private contributions, on a wall in every public school classroom. And in addition to the 10 Commandments, the state of Kentucky statute even required that this notation be placed in small print at the bottom of the display. And here's what it was. So it'd be the 10 Commandments followed by, quote, the secular application of the 10 Commandments is clearly seen in its adoption as the fundamental legal code of Western civilization and the common law of the United States. It's as if they were saying, footnote, this is secular.
Yeah, right.
And the Supreme Court in Stone v. Graham in 1980 ruled 5-4 against the state of Kentucky, saying it was unconstitutional for them to post the 10 Commandments in classrooms. It held that the Kentucky statute violated the first part of something called the Lemon Test. The Lemon Test was instituted by a previous case, Lemon v. whatever, something sour, I'm sure. The Lemon Test was this. It was a 3-part test to decide if something violates the Establishment Clause. First of all, does it have a secular, non-religious purpose? Second of all, it should not advance or inhibit religion. And thirdly, it should not promote any extreme entanglement with religion on the government's part. So if you can pass that Lemon Test, which they said this Kentucky law did not, it can be held as constitutional. So it has to have a secular, non-religious purpose. It cannot advance or inhibit religion, and it cannot promote any extreme entanglement with religion on the government's part. And the Lemon Test was ultimately the rule of law until very, very recently. In fact, I think it was just a year or two ago in a case called Kennedy v. Bremerton. This was that high school football coach that would pray on the sidelines.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out this court, in their decision in Kennedy v. Bremerton, where he was allowed to continue doing this,
Right.
they said, by the way, the Lemon Test is dumb and we don't like it anymore. The Supreme Court totally changed the Lemon Test. And what they did is they essentially said, rather than the Lemon Test now, we must look at history and tradition, essentially. Look at the founders, their intentions, and compare whatever the situation is to history and tradition in the United States of America. That will be how we evaluate if something violates the Establishment Clause.
Okay.
So as soon as that decision is done, enter Louisiana. Governor Jeff Landry signed legislation last week on Wednesday requiring the Ten Commandments be displayed in every public classroom in Louisiana, making the state the only one with such a mandate. And it reignites a debate on, the wall of separation of church and state, as it's called. And they essentially are guaranteeing a Supreme Court case in the penning of this legislation and doing it. In fact, Governor Landry said on Saturday, "I can't wait to be sued."
Wow.
Because
He'll
he
get
knows
his wish.
He will. He knows what's going to happen. This new law requires the Ten Commandments be displayed in each classroom of every public elementary, middle, and high school, as well as public college classrooms. The posters must be no smaller than 11 by 14 inches. And the commandments must be, quote, the central focus of the poster, and, quote, in a large, easily readable font. And it will also include a 3-paragraph statement asserting that the Ten Commandments were, quote, a prominent part of American public education for almost 3 centuries. You see what they're doing?
Mm-hmm.
They're setting up almost the exact same case from 1980, but with more specificity. It's a paragraph now, not a footnote. It's like a preamble saying the Ten Commandments are a part of American history for 3 centuries.
Yeah, they're taking what the Supreme Court said is going to be important.
History and tradition.
And then they're saying, okay, here we go. This has it.
So there's 2 questions here, of course, to answer. It's not just, will it be legal? Like, will the Supreme Court uphold this? But from a faith perspective, is it a good idea? Because it's Christians advocating for this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, will it pass the Supreme Court's new standard? My guess is probably. I mean, we don't know for sure. The court's not as predictable as we might think.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't be surprised if they... Would you guys be surprised if they...
Yes.
You'd be surprised if they allowed it?
Yeah.
Why?
Because if you allow the Ten Commandments, but you don't allow something from the Quran or from Hinduism and Buddhism and Confucianism and the flying spaghetti monsterism, all those religions, well, then you're promoting one over the other.
But now it's based on tradition, according to the new guidelines or whatever, and there is no strong tradition, at least from the framers' perspective, of Hinduism or Islam in this country.
I agree. It'll pass that test. I just think there will be enough justices that say, no, we can't promote one over the others.
Yeah, but they're not going to, they're looking at just the letter of the law. They're not like looking at what ifs. They're just interpreting this one instance. That could open up for, Muslims to say we want something similar in classrooms, and then the Supreme Court would then have to weigh on that one. Mm-hmm. But this is just about this specific case.
And it's just wild, isn't it, to see, when you know the history, this case is not out of nowhere. They penned it specifically to pass the new constitutional test established by the court. And almost identical to the way it was done in 1980 when it was ruled unconstitutional.
I think we just have to ask ourselves what our reasoning for this is. Why do we want this in classrooms? Is it because we think these are just good guidelines for life? Are we trying to make some sort of political statement, which is my suspicion just based on how this has been constructed? And what do we hope to gain by shoving this down people's throats? Are we just going to make people hate us more and turn them further off to the gospel?
And those are the key questions we got to talk about. few more minutes to discuss, I think, an issue that Christians are specifically advocating for in the state of Louisiana. If you're just tuning in, you missed a lot of discussion about the history of the First Amendment and efforts to post the Ten Commandments in classrooms. And what's happened is the way that Ten Commandments were told, they were called unconstitutional in classrooms in 1980, the way the Supreme Court interpreted those laws is gone.
Mm-hmm.
The court now has a new standard of looking at history and tradition, not something called the Lemon Test. So the state of Louisiana specifically penned a law that is clearly designed to try to pass the new test that would require the Ten Commandments to be posted in every public school classroom, K through college. And Daria mentioned, you have to examine why are we doing this and the consequences of it and how Christians ought to think about it. Here's what the sponsor of the legislation said in Louisiana. They said, given all the junk our children are exposed to in classrooms today, it's imperative that we put the Ten Commandments back in a prominent position. This measure allows for our children to look up and see what God says is right and what he says is wrong. It doesn't preach a certain religion, but it definitely shows what a moral code is we should all live by.
Except it does preach a certain religion, because the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, but but somebody would tell you this was a fundamental code in ancient history, one of the first written codes of law. And most laws throughout human history have been based upon this fundamental list of laws, except that one.
Yeah, no, you can't deny that.
It's historic.
I know people are going to have a problem with it because of the first one. If you were to do the 9 commandments, I don't think it would be a problem. I'm sure someone still would have a problem with it. But yeah, I'm really concerned this is just going to make people who have already made their minds up about us hate us more. I don't think this will change hearts or minds.
Ron, are people going to, is this a good idea? I mean, it'll put God, when you were a kid, they prayed in school. So it'll be just a little bit of a throwback here, a little respect for the Lord in school.
I can't remember when we did and when that quit, the praying in school. I know as long as there was tests in school, there was praying in school, but that's not organized prayer. That was just individual desperation. Yes, I still don't think it's a good idea. I think it can be taught as when you're going into Western civilization and talking about the foundation of so many of our legal systems. You do go back to Rome and Greek, and a lot of that is still based upon the Ten Commandments. So there's a derivative factor there if you want to bring it in that way. But if you're looking at it saying, if we put the Ten Commandments in school, in every classroom, that's going to restore a moral clarity to the children of America, you're wrong. It will have no effect. We're
going to acknowledge God in every classroom in Louisiana and point to his law.
And there's probably posters about the 7 food groups or however many they have now telling people to eat right. And the kids are still going to go home and grab a Hostess Ho-Ho or Twinkie or something. And they're not going to decide, well, I need to have more fruits and vegetables than just this sugar here.
You're saying you were not dramatically influenced by the posters in the classrooms you grew up in?
No, not dramatically.
Actually, can you remember any?
There was probably a food group one.
It was a pyramid back then, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Besides that, you're not, maybe the alphabet was up there.
Yeah, in younger grades, it would have been the cursive letters and the regular letters. You know, that cursive stuff's all gone now.
Yeah, that's gone. Now, who benefits from this? Like, because I think the legislation indicates it's going to benefit kids.
I think this actually benefits Christian lawmakers. I think this is going to give them brownie points with their constituents. I mean, we talked about this earlier with the no-fault divorce. You can't legislate morality. This is not, I think, going to have a huge impact on kids. And I think Christians just need to get comfortable and accept the fact that we're a minority. We can still do great work for the gospel. It's just going to look different than what I think you're trying to do.
Now, I mean, I think parents would feel better with this. Christian parents would feel better with this in classrooms. I mean, you want your kids, Lauren, to be in public school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why wouldn't you want the 10 Commandments posted on every classroom that your kids are in all day long? Why wouldn't you want this?
I don't dislike it. I don't dislike this law that they want to put into place. I think we as Christians if we want this, then we have to also be okay with the fact that other religions and historical documents will do the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can't be mean and unkind and nasty about it, because we're also fighting for this too. I don't mind the 10 Commandments being in every classroom. It doesn't bother me at all, one way or the other. It doesn't change anything for me, really. What it does change is that if I want it to be this way, if I want the 10 Commandments in every classroom, then I have to be okay with anything else that goes through law to be in classrooms.
Like, for example, if what Daria indicated earlier, what would stop a group of Muslim Americans from wanting the 5 pillars of Islam posted on every classroom wall in America?
Mm-hmm.
And if the 10 Commandments passed the new test, maybe the 5 pillars would, but maybe not. History and tradition.
They very well could, though, and I'm sure a lot of parents would be outraged.
But, I mean, the 5 pillars of Islam include, by the way, fasting, giving to the poor, prayer.
All good traits.
So here's the other odd one that I didn't expect. I heard a couple of Christians talking about this in a podcast. And one of the debates that has to be resolved is which version of the 10 Commandments will we post? And I was like, excuse me? What do you mean, which version? There's actually 2. Did you know this? I didn't know this until very recently.
I think I had heard that, but I couldn't explain it to you.
And it was a Christian speaker who ended up being invited to speak to a Roman Catholic group, and he was talking about the 9th commandment, and they were like, excuse me, that's not the 9th commandment.
Mm-hmm.
And here's how it goes. Did you know that Protestants use Exodus 20, 1 through 17, as the source of the 10 Commandments? Roman Catholics use Deuteronomy 5, 6 to 17. And so, like, for example, the 2nd commandment for Protestants is, you shall not make unto you any graven image. The 2nd commandment for Roman Catholics is, you shall not take the name of your Lord God in vain. The 3rd commandment for Protestants, you shall not take the name of your Lord God in vain. The 3rd commandment for Catholics, remember to keep holy the Lord's day. So which one are we going to post?
But between the two, they're the same 10. It's just the
different
order the scribes wrote them.
It's different order, yeah. And then, by the way, should it be King James?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people advocate for that one.
What about New Living Translation?
Holman Christian for Dr. Rydelnik.
NIV. Younger kids are not going to be able to read the King James Version.
Right. And, you know, as a teacher, here's the other weird one. As a teacher, I didn't realize this, but I was really excited about like the decorations I could put up in my classroom and the messages it would send. I was a history teacher, so I had lots of works of art I thought were beautiful. I had a friend who went to the Vatican purchase a enormous poster-sized version of Michelangelo's Last Judgment, which is in the back wall of the Sistine Chapel.
Mm-hmm.
If you look it up, it's an amazing painting that it literally describes Revelation. It's like the separation of, like, it's believers going to heaven and non-believers going into hell. And I was so disappointed when I stopped teaching to take that thing down and see that students had poked holes in the eyes of a bunch of all the people. I had to throw it away. It was ruined.
Aw.
Like, my biggest concern with wall decorations was keeping it from being vandalized.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's like, what's the purpose of this on the wall? Is it to make parents feel better? Or is it to really influence kids? I don't know if kids are influenced by posters.
No.
You're in so many different classrooms with so many different posters. It just becomes white noise. You're not looking at the walls unless you're staring into space, and then you're still not looking at the walls.
I would sometimes in boarding classes stare at the walls and posters. I actually like the posters that are, they look like inspirational posters, but they're like, you know, it's a serene picture of a sunset, and it's like, give up now, you're never going to win.
The demotivational posters,
Yeah.
those are my favorite.
Those are so funny. They make me laugh. I remember that one. I'm not saying we've solved this problem, but it's coming back. Especially if the Supreme Court approves this in Louisiana, you're going to see states like Ohio advocating for this. But I think as Christians, we have to critically analyze cost versus benefits analysis of this in a society in which we are a minority. Is this the hill we want to die on? And by the way, we didn't even touch on the idea of the theological problem of this, right? God is omnipresent. He's everywhere. So someone saying he was taken out of public schools, as much as it feels that that's the case, that's denying his omnipresence. He's everywhere. You can't take him out of anything. And so there's no mystical power. It seems that way, that someone would say, oh, let's put up the 10 Commandments because then mystically God's power will be back in classrooms. Be careful. That's not biblical.
Right.
His power is everywhere, whether we place it on the wall in a list or not. And that's where this one was always kind of bothering me too. It's like, wait a minute, what are you trying to say here? God will be happy if you put it on the wall because now he's allowed back in? Whoa. That's not how theology works.